Leading scholars of early Quranic manuscripts agree that there are many discrepancies between the upper and lower layers of the Sana manuscript, but they don't agree on what this means for the standard Islamic narrative. We'll explore their views right now. Welcome, everyone. This is Al Fadi, and with me here in studio is Dr. Jay Smith, and we are continuing with our discussions concerning the Sana palimpsest. And of course, we are using this fascinating book by Dr. Stephen Shoemaker, and the title of the book is Creating the Quran. That's why we call this series Creating the Quran. Dr. Jay, we talked a little bit about the Sana palimpsest and why it's called palimpsest, the fact that there is an upper layer and a lower layer, and the lower layer usually is washed off, and then the upper layer was written on it, and there are some discrepancies between the two. What else we would like to add now?
Well, what we're doing is we're now moving over to this book here, the Sana palimpsest, written by Asma Hilali. This is the first book really written on the subject. That's why it's so important. Therefore, I encourage you to buy it. Go and get it. You need to get it because she actually unpacks it. She has page by page by page of all of that's there. So you can see actually it's written there for those of you who read Arabic. She then unpacks it and shows the differences between the different layers, and she shows where the variants are in red. So she's very clear there are variants. She clearly writes that out, so you see that. But what's fascinating, she admits that the radiocarbon datings, and she looks at the radiocarbon datings, which for this manuscript date between 543 and 643, and the other one 433 to 599. That's on page 20 of her book. Now, what's fascinating is when you look at those dates, that we know that the bell curve, that means the one that's the highest part of the curve that would be the actual date, that the median curve, which would be of the bell curve, that would come about 593 AD, which would put it before even before the date that Muhammad started receiving his revelation. He didn't start receiving his revelation until 610. So a good 17 years earlier is the bell curve date for that. So that would be problematic in and of itself. Also, if you look at the second date, 433 to 599, this precedes not only most of Muhammad's life, which was from 570 to 632, but precedes the beginning of the Quranic revelation again, which doesn't come till 610. So in that case, she is aware of that this is a real problem. But put that to one side, as we said in the earlier episodes, that is the problem with the carbon dating. Mm-hmm. She also admits that there are no similarities between the lower text and the Quranic variant available to us following the Sunni as well as the Shiite compilation. She said this on page 22. So what are her conclusions? Well, she comes up with her conclusions. And you notice that almost every one of these conclusions, and I'm just going to go through 5 of them that she comes up with. First of all, she says that there are deviations. That's the name that actually Elizabeth Quinn gives to them, or variants. That's the name that Sadeghi and Godarzi gives to them. So she quotes both of them and says, there are these variants in the lower tier. She admits that, 70 of them. 70 variants in 63 verses, which are variant from the Hafs text that we're using today, the 1924. I have it right here. This text, this is the one that was then chosen by Muhammad al-Husayni al-Haddad in 1924 in Cairo, then was made the official text in 1985 by King Fahd there in Saudi Arabia. So there are 70 variants from that text. She also, number 3, believes that the lower text was the product of a reading circle. This is what you note as these student texts, a student text, and you confronted that very quickly because we're going to see why as we get the conclusions from the other scholars. And then number 4, she notes that the upper text of the palimpsest contains even variants as well from the Hafs text. So even the lower and the upper ones aren't exactly like the Quran we have today. Therefore, both the lower and the upper text were corrected significantly at some later stage, at some later point. So those are her conclusions. Now, notice she keeps within the standard Islamic narrative by doing that. She doesn't sway outside. Although a lot of Muslims have been attacking her because they're saying, if you're saying that there are corrections, are you saying that there's some error and she says, yes, but these are students' errors. These aren't official texts. You can see she's putting herself into a corner here, and that's a difficulty that fortunately we don't have to deal with because we don't have to maintain that narrative. Let's go and let's see what some of the first of all, do you want to come back to me on any of that before I go on?
It sounds good, and I appreciate the fact that you have synthesized the problem and the issue in here, and also you summarized her views correctly because I've been through the book many times myself.
Okay, let's then go and see what some of the scholars say, because I want to see what the scholars who have read the book, who are also working on this manuscript, who have been working on it longer than she has, which is kind of ironic. The person who actually comes out with the book is not someone who is really the scholar for the book. But someone like Elizabeth Quinn should have really written the book because she has been involved with this manuscript along with her husband since the 1980s. When they first discovered it, or when they first went down to look at it and take pictures of it. But here's what's interesting. Both Gerard Quinn and Dr. Elizabeth Quinn, husband and wife, both have doctorates. Also, Sadeghi and Gudarzi are two others who have looked a long time at this manuscript. They all say this, at least. This is where they all agree, along with Asma Hilali, that the palimpsest is part of a complete Quranic codex that is a vestige of a non-canonical reading. Immediately there, that's going to get hackles of anybody who is a Salafist or anybody who is a radical Muslim or Orthodox Muslim, because that does suggest that there is a problem with the standard Islamic narrative. That narrative suggests there was no difference, no word, not one letter. It has always been the same since the time of Muhammad. Eternally, since the time that these have existed on those eternal tablets. Nonetheless, they, as the scholars, they are coming, that's the first thing they say. Sadeghi and Gudarzi, along with Elizabeth Quinn, believe that the lower text constitutes in itself documentary evidence of a non-canonical Quran. Now, those three do that. Sadeghi and Gudarzi, however, believe that lower text is related to a codex of Ibn Masud. Now, do you know who Ibn Masud is?
Well, he's one of the scribes of Muhammad. His name is Abdullah ibn Masud. If you go on Google his name, let's say, a lot of issues will pop up right away. For instance, Muhammad claimed that Ibn Masud is where you need to go and learn about the Quran. He had an argument, Ibn Masud, with Uthman. He refused to turn in his codex to Uthman. If you get exposure to the codex of Ibn Masud, it has variations than the current Qurans, and the list
Dr. Arthur Jeffrey has done a lot of it.
Exactly.
And what's fascinating, he only has 110 surahs in his Quran, his
That's right.
manuscript. We don't have his manuscript.
Or
That's
111 sometimes, yeah.
That's just what we're told, because there is no manuscript from Ibn Masud from the 7th century. It's just their traditions redacting it back on what they believe were in there. But certainly his became very popular in what is today Baghdad. At that, of course, he was living, if he was a companion of the Prophet, he would have been living in the mid-7th century. He, according to some traditions, he knew 70 surahs before Ubay ibn Ka'b or Zayd ibn Thabit. Zayd ibn Thabit was still a little child, and yet it's Zayd ibn Thabit is the one that was chosen for this book, the Quran that we have today. So you can see, Sadeghi and Gudarzi are saying there are enough differences, possibly that this comes from Ibn Masud's codex. That's what they're saying. How do we know? We don't have it. Therefore, in some ways, that this is nothing more than a guess. Dr. Elizabeth Quinn disagrees with all of them, and that you can see why. She believes that this has nothing to do with
You should give her credit because her and her husband have been studying this for decades.
Yeah. And she says this is nothing more than, can't be Ibn Masud. You don't even know what you're talking about because there's nothing about Ibn Masud's to compare it with. So therefore, this is what she just suggests, and I'm just going to quote her. She said, the lower text was in the process of being corrected and made more precisely canonical. And this is and Asma Hilali quotes her in page 15. She goes on and says that she considers the two layers as stages in a process of canonization. In page 16, she comes up with this. And then explains that the various categories of corrections as attempts to standardize the lower text. So she is very clear that this is a standardization. Let me just finish with her because she is the one that I think that I would go with just because she's been working on long, and she doesn't have an agenda here. She doesn't have to support the standard Islamic. She's not a Muslim herself. I feel sorry for those who really have to support that because they're fearful of what might happen to their career or what might happen to their salary. In this case, Elizabeth Quinn she doesn't have no axe to grind. She doesn't also have a position, a chair to protect or a institution to represent. The lower text is neither Uthmanic, she says, nor from Ibn Masud. I already said that. So she concludes that this is nothing more than a process of being corrected and made more precisely canonical. This is stages in a process of canonization. So she suggests that the corrections predate the upper text. Obviously, they would. There were so many of these incorrections, and both were canonical. There are so many that at some stage the corrector abandoned the correction and just simply wiped it all off, washed it all off, and then started writing over top. That's what we have here. To me, that makes sense. This is an example of an evolved text. This is an example of a frustrated scribe who is, there are so many different things coming in. Could be he's looking at different copies. Could be he's collating it. Could be he's been told by others, that's not the right way to say it. Here's a better way to say it. Could be he had grammatical incorrections. As we're seeing, a lot of these are grammatically incorrect. That's why he then said, well, I give up. Let me just wipe it off and let me write over top.
Thank you. And in next episode, I would like to comment a little bit more on this myself. But what are we talking about next time?
We're going to actually go and see how different the lower and the upper text are. And you're going to see there are lots of differences.
Absolutely. Again, I hope everybody's enjoying this. Continue to make your comments. Continue to share your thoughts. Continue to email us anything you feel is of help to not only something like this, a topic like this, but anything related to the historical criticism that we've been venturing into concerning the origin of Islam, or in this case, textual criticism of the Quran itself. Thank you, Dr. J. Thank you, everyone. This is Al-Fadi. God bless. Thank you for watching this video. Be sure to like and subscribe to our channel, Sira International, and click on the bell so that you receive notifications whenever we publish a new video or go live. I would also like to appeal to you to consider becoming a Patreon patron by clicking the link right below. By doing so, you can give towards the production of these videos. There are also other options for you where you can give to our channel. I thank you from the bottom of my heart.